When it comes to the Israeli and Palestine conflict, who's right and who's wrong? It can be difficult to tell because generally we're only hearing one side or the other. Starting today, I'm going to be interviewing intellectuals from both sides so that you could get both perspectives and then afterwards bring them together for a debate. Today I'm going to be speaking with Abdullah al Andalusi. He's an international speaker and researcher. I'll be posting clips from the video on all platforms with information on how to see the entire video. Right, hello, my name is John Bezrauch and today I'm joined by Abdullah al Andalusi. He's an international speaker and researcher. You want to say hi?
Hi, thank you for having me on the show, John. Pleasure to be here.
Of course. Anyway, from the main reason why I want to sit down and talk to you, and also someone from the Israeli side, particularly people who are intellectuals, was to be able to have a higher level of conversation and to be able to really have particular people in the West understand the Palestinian point of view. Because with the way our media works here, generally only getting one side or the other. So again, I really appreciate you coming in and having a talk with us. And so people understand at home how this is going to go. This right now is not necessarily a debate. I'm going to be allowing him to kind of explain his perspective, the Palestinian perspective of the current events. And then I'm going to ask some tough questions at the end. And I'm going to do that same type of discussion with someone from the Israeli perspective. And then after that, bring them together for a debate. So starting off right now, why don't you start off telling everybody what kind of makes you qualified and unique to have this type of discussion?
Well, I want to give some caveats. I don't really, you could say, represent the Palestinian perspective of a nationality or a people and so on. I'm not ethnically Levantine, from the Levant, that area of the world, and my perspective is really just one of you could say, a historian, a political philosopher in a sense, looking at political philosophy, and really just I often describe myself as a glorified fact checker. Really, I'm only here to present the facts of the matter and the arguments used by different sides, just to understand what was going on. Now, I'm not completely, you could say, impartial from any moral system or worldview. Of course, I'm a Muslim, and I have a worldview which does inform, obviously, how we evaluate these events that were happening down there. And so I have a moral system to draw from. But I'll make it very clear when I'm talking about facts, which are just matters of history, matters of evidence, and of course, where I'm going to make a moral argument from my worldview, but also where we can see points of commonality in moral arguments. So, for example, I think everyone believes in the right to self-defense, right? This is something that we can all share. So these are where I will be arguing for where we can have common bases, as well as holding people to their word. If someone makes an agreement, then they must be held to their word. These are common moral ideas that, generally speaking, we all can hold and we can make some kind of argument from. So that will be really what I'm coming from, is just to kind of discuss the facts, and then I will obviously make it clear where I'll be arguing from my moral worldview, but also from a moral worldview which I think is commonly shared, concerning political agreements, concerning right to self-defense, survival, and so on and so forth. So that's really where I'll be coming from. But I don't represent any perspective. And just off the bat, the Islamic perspective is actually anti-nationalist. So we don't believe that tribes or nations have kind of a moral obligation to be dominant politically, just for the sake of they are a nation or they are a tribe. I believe that sovereignty comes from justice, from obviously righteousness according to one's beliefs. And of course, Christians have the Bible as their ultimate basis for sovereignty, or used to be anyway. Jews, obviously, it is the Tanakh, and of course for Muslims it's the Quran and Sunnah. Although we recognize the previous revelations that came before us and respect them, but we believe that you could say God is the basis of sovereignty. God is the basis of ruling and judgment and so on, because there's no other meaning in the universe other than the purpose of life of human beings, which is to worship the Creator. This is the Islamic perspective. So I'm not arguing that for nationalism. So Palestinian nationalists would probably disagree with me on And of course, Zionists who are kind of Jewish nationalists would disagree with my worldview. But I would argue that nationalism is a modern invention and has actually caused more harm than it does good. So that's where I'm going to be bringing a bit of my value system into this to inform the discussion.
That's great, man. And so with those type of fact checking, I mean, today we're already seeing people selecting certain facts that they want the public to see. How do you see the facts as they come out as with the current situation going on in Israel and Gaza?
Well, one of the many reasons why um, it's a complicated topic is because you can't just like screenshot or freeze in time the just recent events and not look at what happened before, not look at trends, at past injustices, or even recent past injustices. And so, if you were to see, just for example, right? So, let's say someone comes up to you and they slap you on the front around the face, right? And then they walk away. And then let's say someone had a camera phone, on, and they start recording after that event, and then you go back and you're like, hey, what are you doing? You're slapping around the face, and you hit that person back. That person with the camera phone could say, John Bezruch is attacking someone, right? But no, wait a second. If you just saw before that recording, they actually initiate attack on you. Yeah. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Do correct me on that one as well.
That was better than most, definitely better than most of my professors, to tell you the truth. But anyway, yeah, and that's why I wanted to have a discussion and not just watch this clip and watch this video, but in particular to like the most recent attack on Israel from Hamas. How is it? Do you see that? And of course, we will talk maybe as much time leading up to that attack. But for you, just as an individual, how do you view that particular attack?
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? If you say an attack on Israel, what are you talking about? Because as far as the Palestinians are concerned, it's the land is Palestine, and there's an occupying force there
That's a good point. I'll be more specific. Specifically, so today I believe they actually took the Israeli government is reporting that they took maps and plans off of some of the individuals who were killed from the Palestinian side, Hamas, excuse me, specifically Hamas, and they had plans to specifically target schools. So what is your response to Hamas targeting schools, particularly children?
I would. Here's the thing, though. We'd have to get independent verification because there was manuals that were taken off of Hamas, which were in Arabic, and they were translated, and they mentioned nothing about targeting of schools or targeting of children. They talk about taking hostages was the primary thing. So attacking the nearby settlements, taking hostages, and used the word for negotiation.
And then several also news organizations in the United States, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, which they, again, of course, news outlets can be misleading. However, they are official news outlets. So would you say you're just disagreeing with even the contents of that argument still?
No, I always say we must wait for verification. I'll give you an example. So immediately after, in the aftermath of Hamas leaving the enclosed confines of the Gaza Strip, there was a report to I forgot which American report it was, from some unknown soldier, which said there's like they saw 40 beheaded babies. And this went around the world, was reported on CNN, on all these major news outlets, until people started asking questions like, I mean, there's always pictures that are taken, gruesome though they may be, but they can be verifiable, or could the names, identification of these babies be released? And when these questions started to rise, the official Israeli military said that they cannot confirm that report.
That is
so. Yeah,
that is a very good example. However, if I'm not correct, when CNN and other news agencies were reporting that they were using the term allegedly, then now with which then again I will concede that those points ended up coming out to not be exactly what were originally claimed. However, in this circumstance, with those documents being released, those news agencies are verifying that information. But if that's not verification to you, what would be then proper verification for those reports?
Well, I mean, like as I said, this is all happening just really reported today. So I would like to, I'm just asking for, the appropriate time to get experts to look at it. So not even look at me yet, look at it. Experts that have reported on Hamas, have examined Hamas's documentation before. They know their style. They know how to authenticate this, and also a response from Hamas themselves if they might issue a denial that this is not our documentation. So really, in a way, almost just give us an extra day. This is all brand new. But as I said, there's no justification for targeting schools if that's the case. That's not there's no in front of for all of us a moral question here whether it's okay or not. The question is rather authentication, and so I'm sure Hamas is perfectly capable of denying or owning up to that. But this is really just been kind of released just in the last 2 days or so. I just wanted to wait for the experts to actually verify before jumping on everything as it comes off the press. Because we don't want to make the same mistake as happened with the 40 beheaded babies allegation, which was quite egregious and was used around the world for days, but before it was questioned. So that's all I'm saying is prudence. I'm only cautioning prudence.
Prudence, I think, is more than reasonable. However, just would it not match earlier comments from Hamas? They're saying that they wish to eradicate Israel and the Jews that occupy it. But again, I don't. If we want to measure prudence with that, I think that's appropriate.
Well, I'd always ask again, which document did Hamas say they want to eradicate Jews or eradicate the Jews? They want to. Sorry, they want to. They want to eradicate Israel as a political entity. That's correct. That they've said that in their manifesto. And so on. They haven't been bashful about that. But to eradicate Jews. Now, I want to kind of also explain to the Anglo-Saxon speaker that in the Middle East, as always the case, people are referred to by names such as, like, for example, Western Europeans were called the Franks by Arabs, called the Farangi, right? Franks. And in some cases, they still use it to this day, right? And they say, oh, the Franks did this. Now, in World War II, for example, when fighting the Germans, no, people generally said fighting the Germans. They didn't say fight the Nazis. But the Nazis are separate from the Germans. Not every German is a Nazi, for example. But this common parlance was used. So when Hezbollah has used rhetoric like they're fighting the Jews, but they are referring to Zionists in that particular case rather than Jews collectively, or all Jews everywhere. And I say this because, as the Muslim world has had 1,300-year history, 1,400-year history of having Jews living in every part of the Muslim world, residing alongside Muslims, under pacts, under treaties, under having their law courts protected, having their synagogues protected. So the issue is not about eradicating the Jews or eliminating Jews as Jews per se, but rather they are usually referring to Zionists. And this is a problem because obviously when it gets translated, it gets misunderstood by Anglo-Saxon speakers who say, why aren't you more specific? But even then, like in World War II, they say we're fighting the Germans, but they're not fighting all Germans, are they? They're fighting.
I'm trying to reference Hamas's own manifesto from the early 2000s, but I will reread that. I do not have it presently in front of me, and then I'll bring that back up on our next discussion. However, if you're saying that their manifesto is only saying to reclaim Israel, since I don't have a document in front of me, I'll just go ahead and say that's true, but I will check that one later. And so you want to, so you're standing hard on the stance that in the manifesto it does not say that they wish to eradicate Jews or the people, and it's just to reclaim Israel, the territory.
Well, like they don't say we need to eradicate all Jews from the Muslim world, kick out all Jews from the Muslim world, or kill all Jews, right? Specifically, what they're arguing is against the Zionist entity. Regardless of whether we agree or disagree with Hamas, regardless whether we agree or disagree with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, we have to be factually accurate in trying to not strawman, their stances. And I try in my line of work, I have to try to understand people on their own terms. That goes for Hamas, that goes for the IDF as well. So the IDF have never had an official document that said eradicate all Arabs, kick out all Arabs. And that's never been an official policy of the IDF, as much as people's rhetoric have argued that that's what they want to do. So that would be straw manning the IDF.
Argument more difficult because currently 20% of the population in Israel is Arab, and however 0% of the population in Gaza is zero. So that is not a really equivalent argument?
Well, I mean, if you were a Jewish Palestinian, which they were Palestinian Jews or Jewish Palestinians, prior to the creation of the state of Israel, and there was an area whereby that you'd have rights by the state, and you'd have privileges, and you'd have access to water, you've had access to food, no blockades, no embargoes, nothing. Or you could live on the side that is suffering from blockades and embargoes and bombing and so on. Well, where would you want to live, right? You wouldn't want to live amongst the Palestinian Arabs. You'd want to live amongst the area where your family are safer and have better prospects. So the Palestinians there's never been a policy of Arab Palestinians kicking out Jews or to envision a Palestinian state with no Jews. In fact, the Palestinian Authority actually had some Palestinian Jewish members in it. Not many, but they were there. You can check out their names. Of course, these people were condemned as traitors in Israel, in the Israeli press. But the point is that for the Palestinians, it's not an issue. And it is, I think this is going to want to be the main conception is this is not a Jewish versus Arab conflict. And this is not a Muslim versus Jewish in the religious sense conflict. I want to make that very clear before we move on, because there's a lot of tangles and misconceptions. Jordan Peterson, I was very disappointed in him, who going outside of his profession and talking about matters that he hasn't properly researched. And he had a message to Muslims saying, why do you hate the Jews? It's like, what? Why would we hate the Jews specifically? Like, it's ridiculous. And there's two reasons, there's two angles there. So there's an ethnic angle. So are Muslims or Middle Easterners or Arabs motivated to hate Jews as an ethnicity? Well, no. We both speak Semitic languages from the region. There are many common words in both Hebrew and Arabic. The term Arab is a name that really denotes anyone who speaks Arabic. The Middle East is filled with people of different ethnicities, sometimes using the blanket term Arab because they now speak Arabic. But amongst Arabs, there are people who have significant histories of Jewish ancestry around the Muslim world. Myself, although I'm not, my background, for example, I'm from Portugal. It's not it wasn't the Muslim world. It's not Muslim world at the moment. Of course, it was in the past. But as I told you before, even I have some Jewish ancestry in my past. I discovered it by looking at my family name, and it was confirmed by when you did the DNA ancestry test that there was some remnants more than other Portuguese people. So that would back that up. Arabs, Jews, there's no ethnic component there because in essence we're all from the same region, for those who are from that region, and we all are intermixed, and we all have intermixed ancestry. So there's no such thing as what you saw in Europe of the idea of a purity of Germanic blood against these Semite, impure Semites, which included Arabs, by the way, initially in the 19th century German kind of racialist thinking. Okay, so there's no ethnic component to hate because we're all intermixed, and so that wouldn't make sense. And our languages are all Semitic. What about the religious component? Yeah, so is there a reason for Muslims to hate Jews as a religion? So, just to educate your listeners very briefly, is the most important principle in Islam is monotheism. right? It's our most important principle. We call it Tawheed. It is the belief in one God, that there's only one God and there is no other gods. Everything else are just false idols. There's only God is worthy of worship. Now, as you know, Muslims have some disagreement with the Christian concept of the Trinity, where it's believed that God is both the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but three in one, and one, but one God, but yet three separate persons. This is an issue, and of course, considering Jesus to be God incarnate, right? So, as Muslims, we view that to be an affront to monotheism, an affront to a purity of God being unlike His creation. He's not like his creation. He's not a human being, basically. And yet, there is in the Quran, it advocates Muslims to respect Christians. But Jewish theology doesn't have that. Jewish theology believes in one God, doesn't believe that God comes down as a human being, and worships the exact same God that Muslims worship. We all worship the same God. Has the same Semitic names for God, Eloh, or Allah, or in Aramaic or Syriac, Elaha. These are all they're all spelt the same way, right? I suppose when an Anglo-Saxon hears Allah, it's like, oh, what's this weird foreign concept, right? But just go and look at that movie Passion of the Christ, where it was filmed in Aramaic, right? The language they thought most likely Jesus spoke. Listen to when he says God in that, right? He goes Allah, right? Yeah.
No, that's his language. But back to kind of this
So,
please.
Yeah, no, yeah. Sorry, I was just saying that basically, theologically speaking, Muslims and Jews, we have the similar concept of Tawheed, of monotheism, to the extent that, for example, actually Jews also consider that Christian Trinity doctrines are somewhat an affront to monotheism, to the point that they're not allowed to go into Christian churches. Many religious Jews would say a Jew is not allowed to pray in a Christian church, but they can go into a mosque, right? And of course, okay, Muslims don't have that restriction on churches, but basically we have so many similarities with between Islam and Judaism, religiously speaking. We don't eat meat that has blood in it when it died, so we believe that that meat must be exsanguinated. We pray in similar ways. There's so much similarities between Judaism and Islam, more than there is between Islam and Christianity. So why would we have a specific hatred against Judaism when Judaism is very similar to Islam, and also has monotheism as its root core, which for us as Muslims is our highest concern, is monotheism. And so for us, we don't view Jews as polytheists or pagans or any of that kind of stuff, because they have the same one God concept that we have, and a God that doesn't come down as a human being, and so on and so forth, or doesn't come down as a statue, or you can worship him by a statue. They have the same understanding that we do. So there's no special animus against them that Muslims would hold. So that's where I would correct those misconceptions. There is no specific or special hatred for Jews that Muslims hold. In fact, of all the religions in the world, the Jews are the closest to Muslims in terms of our beliefs and practices.
Yeah, I appreciate you explaining that. I don't think I've been able to do that in such an articulate way as you did, the similarities between Islam and Jews. Now, instead of talking about, I guess, then why it happened, let's talk about, you called yourself a fact checker of just what happened. Forget about today's event, but now there's been over a week since the initial attack took place. Are you able to acknowledge that civilians and children were killed in that attack from Hamas?
Yes, there were non-combatants that were killed during the Hamas attacks, yes.
Next, I think this is a good time for us to kind of clarify what you mean by combatants, because I think a lot of people have difficulties with that definition, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, a non-combatant is someone. There is difference of opinion in even Western schools of looking at warfare and war theory as to what is a non-combatant, but there are two opinions, I think, both in the West and in Islamic jurisprudential thinking. So a non-combatant is someone who is not part of any military organization, or is not a reservist, or a non-combatant is someone who doesn't actually presently have a weapon on them and is not actively involved in combat. So there's these two different definitions of what is a combatant. But it is safe to say that by both those definitions, there were those who were not reservists who were killed, and that's regrettable, because that's, human life should never be taken unjustly, and those who are not involved in fighting should never be involved in fighting. This is an Islamic jurisprudential principle, which has 1,300 years of scholarly unanimity behind it from Islamic scholarship. And as well as the same thing, it's a similar agreement in Western schools of thought, although not entirely, because some Western schools of thought debate as to whether governments are complicit and are considered to be military targets too in a war, and what counts as someone who is guilty or reprehensible. Is it someone that votes for the government that is committing war crimes? Are they also culpable? These were questions that have been raised amongst Western political theorists themselves, which is a different discussion, of course. But it's clearly a fact that there are people who are non-combatants by both definitions, which have regrettably died, and of course more so on the Palestinian side. Much more non-combatants have died on the Palestinian side, as has always been the case.
We'll go there next, right after this, but with that acknowledgement, and I'm not asking you to completely condemn or asking if you're going to condemn Hamas or an entire organization, but you condemn those actions as a Muslim by Hamas, specifically just the killing of non-combatants.
I condemn all injustices, regardless of who does it and who it's been done to. The Quran says, stand for justice even against yourselves. So this is, of course, I have no compunction in condemning injustice and the killing of innocents, or those who are not involved in fighting.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's very well said. Let me ask you, we were having a conversation the other day, because I want to make sure the audience understands, in particular, since this is in relation to Islam and this perspective, is Islam's perspective of non-combatant. And you gave an example of a DoD employee, and if they were killed, whether or not they actually had a weapon in their hand or if they were a particular soldier. Would you mind elaborating on that, just so the audience understands that in the terms of Islam's non-combatant?
Again, there's kind of two opinions in Islamic jurisprudence as to what is a non-combatant. So the typical one is someone that doesn't have a weapon on them and is not participating in a fight, right? So if there's even a battle and the enemy drop their weapons and they run away, then they're not to be killed. Basically, could be captured but not killed, because they've ceased being a combatant at that point in time. There's other opinion, of course, but this is more concerning tribal warfare, where all males of a tribe all males who are capable of activity were assumed to be combatants. And this was in a case where you have tribal fights, and then who is culpable in tribal warfare. The Old Testament, or the Tanakh, has the same actually understanding about tribal warfare, that males in a tribe that have committed in excess or they've done injustice, the women and children are not to be blamed, and maybe the old people are not necessarily to be blamed, although not in all cases when it comes to some of the Canaanites that was wiped out when the Israelites invaded Canaan or Palestine. But in Islam, there's an exception for old people and young people who are not involved in when it comes to tribal warfare, and the presumption that all military age males of a tribe are culpable for the actions of the tribe itself. So that's a different discussion, but it concerns what society are you dealing with? So if you're dealing with a society which is an empire like a Roman Empire or the Persian Empire, the people are not part of the fighting. They're just the ruling empire is the one that has an army, and so that army is to be blamed for whatever it does. But then if it comes to tribal warfare, then that's a different lens to look into. Then it becomes military age males can be culpable for the actions of the tribe generally in fighting, because it's expected that all military age males are actually involved in the fighting.
Now, I cut you off a little bit earlier, so why don't you go back and kind of explain that perspective that you were talking about as far as the more recent events regarding Israel and Palestine and the Palestinian perspective.
Well, like it is there is a debate amongst perhaps jurisprudential scholars and others, where who is culpable when fighting an enemy. Is it someone who is actively has a weapon on them at the time, or are they? What if they are military reservists and they're not on active duty, but they're potentially to be called up at any point in time for active duty? I'll give you an example from a case that you might know very well, being that you had some adventures in Afghanistan when you were in the army. So the US military, they don't care if a Taliban commander or leader or even just a Taliban fighter puts down his weapon and goes home to his family or in a house, because they will still shoot a drone through their window and blow it up, because for them it was like, well, they were active in the Taliban once. That's sufficient for them to be culpable. Therefore, they can be targeted at any point in time, even if they've dropped their weapon, even if they've retired, right? So the American military don't care if you have a weapon in your hand or not at the point of that they kill you. But that you at some point were involved in military actions, right? So the same discussion happens amongst some Palestinians as to whether military reservists, Israeli military reservists, which are 18 to 40, or could be a bit higher depending on emergencies, which are both males and females, except those who have given birth and then they are exempt, whether they are combatants or not, because they are military reservists. They are military trained. They've served in the Israeli quote unquote defense force, and they might have committed crimes, or they might have, they're part of that organization. So then there's a discussion as to whether they are combatants or not. So there is difference of opinion. Some would say that if you're not holding a weapon, you're not a combatant, and others would say if you were part of a criminal organization that was involved in killing civilians, then you blame you lies with you the collective guilt of that organization, since you were a military reservist in that organization, much like the same as the Americans treated the Taliban, and anyone associated with the Taliban. Doesn't matter what you were doing, they could kill you and say, well, that's Taliban commander, Taliban administrator, whatever.
And obviously there's a lot of context with that, but in general, I would say what you said is rather accurate. But I mean, that's a whole nother discussion as far as U.S. involvement and the way that we use drones. And there's probably most things you and me would agree on when it comes to that. So I guess just moving on, a lot of people get confused because they see the protests in the street or riots in the street, whichever you want to call it, and there's different.
May I just quote something to you, because again, I'm a bit of a fact checker, right? So I went to the Hamas their covenant of 1988, their manifesto, and because I don't want people to take my word for it, I always go with the assumption that I will be challenged on everything I say, and in a way that's good. That's a healthy skepticism. If you look at Article 31, I ask everyone to read Article 31. Here's what Hamas says about the followers of Judaism and all this. It says, under the wing of Islam, it is possible for the followers of the three religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, to coexist in peace and quiet with each other. Peace and quiet would not be possible except under the wing of Islam. Past and present history are best witness to that. So this is where they talk about now. Yeah, Hamas want the Middle East to return back to Islamic ruling as it was before the British invaded. But the point is that they argue that Islam is the best way to guarantee coexistence between Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And they are arguing that this is where people can live in peace. Jews can live in peace with Muslims, and Christians and Christians with Jews, and vice versa. So if Hamas is goal was to eliminate Judaism from the face of the earth, they wouldn't be saying that Islam gives the solution for Jews, Christians, and Muslims to all coexist peacefully. It wouldn't be congruent with that narrative.
What manifesto? I'm sorry. That's the Hamas manifesto from what year?
1988. It was the oldest one, the older one. It's
That's, I
cool.
think that's where that might fall, because I believe I was referencing the one from the early 2000s, which again, I'm not going to.
They toned down the later one, right? The later one is toned down. The early one is much more, you could say, raw in
Again,
object.
I'll reread it, find the section if necessary, and bring it up in the next conversation.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. If there's anything more you want to add to that, please feel free.
No, that's it. I just wanted to bring that up because it was mentioned, and so
Yeah.
I wanted to quote it verbatim.
No, from the 1988 document.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the current Palestinian goal, I believe you want to separate the Palestinian goal versus the Hamas goal, correct? Or do you think those are very much in line as far as what's their end state?
Well, I mean, since Hamas are Palestinians, or ostensibly, they would represent a particular current in Palestinian thinking. And of course, Fatah, their kind of rivals, represent another current in Palestinian thinking. And so there are two kinds of approaches or general objectives. One, so the Fatah kind of method, Fatah would be one where they would want a separate state from the government of Israel, and a state where Palestinians could be unmolested and kept separate. Now, Hamas's kind of earlier stated goal was to remove the Zionist occupation in its entirety and restore Palestine and perhaps the region to the unitary Islamic rule it was under before the British invaded in 1915 and so. But since that point in time, they've kind of toned down their objectives, and they've argued that they are happy to engage in a prolonged truce with the government of Israel, or an undefined length, basically. So that's basically the kind of, you could say, the objectives. But there are maybe some Palestinians who have argued that the two-state solution is no longer feasible because the state of Israel keeps building settlements on the West Bank, which it hasn't formally annexed. And if that's the case, then they want some Palestinians, and even maybe the Palestinian Authority, which is under Fatah, has threatened the state of Israel with its worst possible fear, and that is the equalization of Palestinian citizens into an amalgamation into the state itself. They say, okay, you know what? This two-state solution is no longer feasible. Let's make a one-state solution then. Give us Israeli citizenship, and we will just be under the same rule. And at least we then have fixed rights and representation. And why that's the worst possible scenario for Zionists is because the proportion of Jews to quote unquote Arabs is about 50-50 in the entire territory. And if you had a democratic state with 50-50 Arabs and Jews, the Zionist goal of a state which represents specifically Jews and Judaism and or Jewish interest or Jewish ethno-cultural kind of perspectives will basically dissipate because they're ethno-nationalists, and you can't have an ethno-nationalist state when there's actually equal portions of all the ethnic groups there.
I think we're getting kind of into the Israeli perspective, and I'll definitely
yeah.
that individual.
But the reason why I say this because it's a minority opinion amongst Palestinians, but it's a growing one, because once they give up on the idea of two states and they say, okay, let's just live together in one state, the Palestinian struggle becomes less of a struggle for statehood, and it becomes a civil rights struggle in the land of Palestine under the Israeli government. They say, look, you know what? If Israel controls the West Bank, if Israel says that the West Bank belongs to them, okay, officially annex it and give us citizenship then. Yeah, not in this limbo where we're under military occupation, where we don't control the laws that govern us in Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank. and or the Gaza Strip can be blockaded as a separate state or a separate entity in some gray area. But let's go out of this gray area now and just become actual citizens of the state of Israel. At least then we can have a chance of representation, right? So that's the third kind of a third minority opinion amongst the Palestinians, which is turning it into a civil rights struggle and ending the two-state solution objective.
And I think it's appropriate to understand all those perspectives. So I'm glad you brought that up. But I think for a lot of people in the Western society, particularly the United States, that kind of confuses them with all the different perspectives, because we see it maybe like you see our politics. We have the Republican policy, libertarians, liberals, moderates here in the United States. But at the same time, there's only one United States foreign policy. So I'll ask you in that terms, what would be the Palestinian foreign policy as far as end state of what they want when it comes to Israel?
Well, I said there are obviously different two generally different perspectives. So one is a two-state solution where Palestinians have a sovereignty for themselves. Palestinian Arabs have sovereignty, and the state of Israel keeps its sovereignty in pre-1967 borders. So the 1967 borders becomes the basis for a Palestinian state and a quote-unquote Israeli state.
Which reminds viewers, what is that border? Gaza and West Bank?
Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, so that's one perspective. The other perspective is that, which is perhaps more Hamas's perspective, and others, is that we do away with nation states, and we instead have returned back to a kind of Islamic unitary rule of the Middle East, with all Middle Eastern countries kind of rejoining into one unitary state as was before under the Ottomans, and each religious community having their own law system, their own customs protected, their rights and so on and so forth, their own autonomy, basically. In a way, you could say that the Islamic political system is a federation of religious communities, would be the best way to describe it. Where
all religions would be able to practice equally under Hamas's new state in Israel.
Well, I mean, I'm not entirely sure the Hamas kind of blueprint for an Islamic state.
I asked you were currently talking about the Hamas's.
Yeah. The reason why is because they reference pre-existing ideas or models of Islamic State that was before them, which is the Ottoman Millah system, whereby each religious community was autonomous and had their own courts and in cases their own police force for their own community, and they could manage their affairs internally without interference from the state or from the government. So I think in a way Hamas would want to go back, rewind the clock back to 1915, 1916, and kind of go back to that Middle East as it was before you had the rise of nation or the creation or imposition of nation states. So these are the kind of the objectives there. But here's the key issue, which is there, no, or at least no serious. There's never an argument that to say Jews must leave the Middle East, right? And I think that's where people often misrepresent any kind of discussion. Yeah. Well, I mean, generally, or just the Palestinians' desires generally, even up to the point when the Arab League made an ultimatum to the Israeli government, which is to basically on the eve of its independence or declaration of its independence, to say that look, we want a unitary state there of Jews and Arabs and Arab Christians, Arab Muslims. I mean, technically speaking, you could also call it Arab Jews as well, because if they speak Arabic, they're also Arab as well. But this was resisted by the Zionists because Zionists wanted to create an ethno state. You can't have an ethno state when there's equal proportions, your ethnicity and not a person's ethnicity in that region. So to put it into a buzzword, I suppose the desire by others is that the Zionists must leave, but Jews can stay, would be the best way of putting it. but some of people's objectives, what they want to see, because Jews have lived in the Middle East for 1400 years and beyond. But in terms of the Muslim experience living alongside Jews, it's not a new thing for us. It's not radical thing for us. It was over a millennium old tradition.
Again, people get confused of the more reasonable perspective, but then what they see is Hamas's perspective. And again, I know you can't get inside their head, but they are currently the people who govern Palestine, and which I'm assuming come up with
the Gaza Strip, yeah,
right. That then most likely would be the leading force in the governance of a one state of Israel under Hamas for Islamic State. And so I know you can't get inside their head, and that'd be wrong for me to ask, but I want to ask you as a researcher, as an intellectual who understands a lot of issues, do you believe if Hamas was under control of the Israeli state, that the Jews truly would be able to live free and practice?
Well, I mean, I can't look into the minds of the leaders of Hamas. I can only go by public statements. As a political analyst, I can only go by public statements, by documents, and by the general feeling of what many Palestinians have reported.
You're not an actual researcher,
yeah. But according to their own manifesto, the older one, the more quote unquote radical one, or what you want to call it, they themselves say that that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity can coexist, and their followers can coexist, but under the rubric of an Islamic system. So that being their professed declaration, I can only assume that if they were to create an Islamic state of Palestine, that would be how they would operate.
Just that, there's other public statements, there's calls in the streets, there's actions taking place. There's more than just words from that manifesto. So you as an intellectual who's able to view all these things, not just use one thing as an example, and then you are able to gather your information, do you believe Jewish people would be able to live and prosper in a state under Hamas?
Well, again, this is you're discussing a hypothetical, like would Hamas do? I'm only limited to their public professions, what they say, what they claim, and if they were not intending that would go against their stated objectives and their stated declarations to the people. Again, many Palestinians, there are still Palestinians alive. They're old, but they were alive, and they would tell you that they remember living side by side with Jewish neighbors who were Palestinian Jews or Palestinian Arab Jews, whatever you want to call them. And there's no reason why Palestinians wouldn't go back to that situation to live alongside as neighbors throughout the territory of Palestine and beyond, right? And beyond. But as to whether Hamas, do they secretly intend to do something else? Well, I can't speak for hypotheticals and whether they secretly do this or that. Now that'll be speculating. I can only go by their public statements, and that's what they've said. They've said that they want to create an Islamic state for Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
About the LGBT community, how would they live? Would they be able to live in the Hamas territory ruled by Hamas?
Well, that's a different subject matter and discussion. I mean, I'm happy to go into it, which is, in essence, this is now more question of Islamic law. And again, I'm going to make an assumption that Hamas wants to stick by Islamic law.
They have to leave this territory.
Well, let's rewind this a bit, right? So, in the Bible, the Tanakh, the New Testament, and of course, in the Quran, there's actually no word for a person who's called gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans. There's no word for to define a political community with a political identity. This is a recent Western invention that was from the 19th century. Initially, came from was popularized by a guy called Kraft von Ebing when he talked about sexual psychopathy. So this is where we're going in a different discussion here. In biblical law, both Jewish, Christian, and of course in the Quran, there's no group of people called homosexuals. There's no group of people called heterosexuals or bisexuals.
Yeah, I
There's
don't
just
think
people and actions. Yeah.
what's just in the Bible or the Quran. I think the conversation is more based on how people are going to live under a state of current Israel or the Israel controlled by Hamas, and with all the information from whether it's the Quran, current events, public statements. As an intellectual, do you
Yeah.
think people, whether they're Arabic, Jewish, Islam, will they be able to live openly in a state ruled by Hamas?
Well, again, I don't know about Hamas. I'm going by the assumption that Hamas will be true to their word, hypothetically, that they will follow Islamic law as is understood by Muslims for centuries. Now, based on that assumption, well, I have studied what Islamic law says throughout the centuries, the political application of the law, and so I'm now going based on that presupposition. I don't know if Hamas would do so, right? But I can only tell you what Islamic law says, what is known by Islamic law. And in Islamic law, you don't, what people do in the privacy of their own homes is not the state, it's not the business of the state, right? That's always been the case. There's no such thing as a gay person or a heterosexual person. That those definitions, it's irrelevant to any of the laws. In fact, as I said, these are recent terms from the 19th century. So if you identify as a gay person, you're not, because the classic trope, and usually Islamophobic trope, is that you identify as a gay person and they're gonna, and somehow an Islamic system or state will kill you just for that. No, right? Because that's not a classification of Islamic law, neither of biblical law either. Islam only looks at what you do in public, and in this case, what is punishable is basically having sex in public. That's what is punishable under Islamic law. Inside your own home, there's the Quran guarantees the right of privacy, so the state can't look at you what you do inside your own home. They can't tap your phones and collect data in mass data in bulk, like the NSA does, right? So the Quran would give you better rights than you have in America, actually, in that particular case. So that would be my answer for that, because you mentioned the word LGBT, because you mentioned that, but that's not necessarily, it's not relevant to the discussion about Israel and Palestine. But I want to make an extra fact check correction there. You refer to the land as Israel. The land has never been called in what you called Palestine, or that whole area. It's never been called Israel throughout history. And you might be surprised by that. What you mean is it not called the Kingdom of Israel or what have you? No, Israel is the name of the people, right? Israel is the tribe. The 12 tribes are the 12 tribes of Israel. The land was under their jurisdiction of these 12 tribes were called the land belonging to these tribes, the land of Israel. But the name of the land, the actual name of it, is the toponym of this, was either Canaan before the invasion of the Israelites, or Palestine or Philistine by the earliest mention is the Greek historian Herodotus, which is I think before Roman control of that area, and the Romans referred to it as Palestine. That's what it was named, because they named the whole land by a coastal name of the Philistines, so they named the whole land by that name. Did you know, like, for example, England is not the name of the land, right? England is the name of, I suppose, the jurisdiction of the Anglo-Saxons that control it. The name of the Isle of UK I live in, it's called Britannia, right? That's the name of the land, okay? It's different from the jurisdictions, the political jurisdictions that control it. So Israel is the name of a political jurisdiction, which originally came from the name of a tribe, but it's not the name of the land. So Palestine or Canaan, whichever you want to pick, those are the names of the land itself, has always been. And in the 7th century, you see Muslim chroniclers calling it Palestine. Of course, the Romans called it Palestine. Herodotus, the Greek historian, called it Palestine in essence. And of course, prior to that, you see up until the 17th century BC, it being called Canaan before the Israelite invasion that occurred in about roughly 11th or 12th century BC.
So I know in current times we have a hard time even agreeing on what's currently happened. So the past is no surprise, could be even more difficult. However, that's not my realm of expertise, but I think I'm just going to reference from what I understand the Bible says, which I want people to make sure they understand, and correct me if I'm wrong. Islam does acknowledge the Old Testament, correct? And in that, Joshua entered Israel 1400 BC, Kingdom of David 1000 BC, first temple built in 900 BC. Are you saying, is that, am I not quoting that accurately?
Okay, so there's 2 points here. So what was the land called at different junctures, or and what is Islam's perspective on the Bible? So Islam's perspective on the Tanakh and the New Testament is that it does capture some revelation, but not perfectly. That these things, the revelation hasn't been perfectly preserved by human beings in these prior records. The Injil is not the same as the New Testament, by the way. Right? The Injil, the revelation of Jesus, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, is not the same as the New Testament. Right? You get like almost 50% of the New Testament is the writings of Paul, who came afterwards and never even saw Jesus in the flesh. Right? And the Old Testament, sorry?
Referencing the Geneva, which is like an older version of the Bible, but
yeah. But in the Tanakh, I mean, what was the land like? When Moses was informed, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, when Moses was informed that he'd be given the land, he'd be given the land of Israel, he'd be given the land of Canaan, right? And Joshua, was to enter the land of Canaan and fight the Canaanites, take possession of their land, right? So the land of Canaan, that's in the Bible. The word Canaan is in the Bible, and it's also confirmed by historical evidence as well. Really old historical evidence prior to the invasion of the Israelites there.
But I'm just referencing particular when Joshua entered Israel 1400 BC. But
sorry, 1400 BC. Well, we don't know the exact dates, although the earliest mention of the word Israel is deemed to be in the Menapatas stele, which is like a kind of wooden, not wooden, a rock stone engraving, around 1208 BCE. And the word Israel, the icon used for that is a people, not a land. It says, it talks about the Egyptians have plundered Canaan. Talks about this. Canaan has been plundered. Ascalon has been overcome. Giza has been captured. Yenaum has been made non-existent. These are town names, city names. And then it says Israel, or the icon is for peoples. The peoples has been laid waste, and his seed is not. The seed of Israel has been is gone, as in their lineage. So it's referring to a people. So the earliest mention of Israel has always been as a people, not as the name of the land. Even this is ancient Egyptian record, right? And so there's really no debate about this. Let's have a look. Let's look in the Bible then, if you like. Look at Numbers. God said to him, though your name is Jacob, you'll no longer be called Jacob, you'll be called Israel. So God named him Israel. And then the Lord said to Moses, command the sons of Israel, Beni Israel, and say to them, when you enter Canaan, the land will be allotted to you. So it talks about him entering Canaan, not Israel. So this is where the name of the land has been Canaan, or was later called Palestine by I suppose you could say foreigners who said, oh, we see some Philistines, so we'll call it Palestine. But the name of the land has never been called Israel. Now, there was a small exception when there was a split in the kingdom of Israel between the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, where the kingdom of Israel, which was part of Palestine, was just nicknamed Israel, and Judah was just called Judah. But that was much later on. But the land in its entirety has always been called either Canaan or Palestine, but never has been called Israel. It might be called the land belonging to the Israelites, like Eretz Israel, but not the land. The name of the land is Israel. So that's just a kind of the historical facts. And again, I'd ask, please go check it out for yourself. Challenge me on this.
I'm not going to fact check live. I'll look at these and bring them up to our next discussion. But if that's what you have in front of you, I'm not going to argue what's right in front of your face. So back to the current events. One of the things I find troubling just in general is the refugees. And the Palestinian refugees in particular. And what confuses
Mm-hmm.
me, and I think a lot of other Westerners, is why is countries like Egypt not opening up the borders to the Palestinian refugees, in your opinion?
Oh, most likely because what happens, like what happened in 1947 was Palestinian refugees came streaming out of villages and towns that were attacked by the Haganah, the Israeli, the proto-Israeli defense force, quote unquote defense force, and Irgun, and these which were terror groups at the time, publicly internationally acknowledged as terror groups, Irgun and Stern Gang. So they came streaming out, and as soon as they stream out, then Israel takes possession of the land and says this now belongs to the state of Israel, and they even have made a law to justify that, called the absentee property law. Okay, you can again Google it yourself, check it out for yourself, please read it for yourself. If a Palestinian leaves their land on within Palestine, within a certain within certain defined boundaries, the state can declare them to be absentee. Not that they've left it permanently; they might have just gone for potentially a holiday, but it can be declared that it is they're absentees. And in one case, when Palestinians didn't leave, they were declared present absentees, which is the most confusing thing I've ever heard in my life. That you're present, but you're absent at the same time. Again, check that out for yourself. Do not take my word for it at all. Please check out the law. I can give you the references to the laws in question. I actually have them here. It's called the Absentees Property Law, 1950. And if you look, I got a lot of text there. I'm not going to read it for you, but I want you to read it for yourself. So here's what happens. The Palestinians are concerned themselves, or also that once they leave an area of land, they can't come back to it, because that's always been their experience. And so if the refugees, if refugees leave Gaza, escaping the bombing, and Gaza is temporarily depopulated of Palestinians as they want to escape the mass. Just a couple of days ago, they confirmed 6,000 bombs were dropped on Gaza, and each bomb can take out one apartment block. They'll never come back to Gaza. They'll never be allowed to come back to Gaza. So Egypt and many of the surrounding Arab states have tried to counter the kind of Israeli demographic strategies by simply refusing refugees to go in. Although many have taken throughout history, the Jordanians took so many, it was concerned that 50% of Jordan was Palestinian, basically, because of how many refugees they took. And Lebanon has tons of refugees from the past.
But that's kind of confusing, I think, to the audiences. So what's the reason Egypt's not taking the it seems like your argument is that because they're respecting some type of 73-year-old Palestinian law, that the current day Egypt is not taking Palestinian refugees.
They're basically Egypt. Egypt doesn't want Israel to kick out the Palestinians out of Gaza, depopulate them, some might say, ethnically cleanse, and that would be the permanent state of affairs. They will lose. The Palestinians will be evicted from Gaza Strip permanently. Because as was happened in the past, that's what's happened when if Israel takes over an area by kicking out the existing Palestinians in it who are trying to escape the bombs, they will confiscate it completely, and the refugees will never be allowed a right of return back to their own villages, their own homes. And what allows that is an Israeli law that was implemented so they can confiscate. You leave your home, you lose it. You just leave it, not permanently. You just leave it for a week or two, maybe, to escape the bombing, but you can then lose your home. So Egypt doesn't want to be foisted with all these refugees are in its own borders who will be permanently Egyptians, because
going off any public statement currently by the Israelis or the Jordans for that opinion, or you just going off?
No, we're talking about why Egypt hasn't opened up the Rafah border. So it doesn't want Palestinians surging into its territory and becoming a permanent problem for them. When what Egypt would, I can only go on based on Egyptian policy, like many of the other regional states, is that they want Palestinians to have their own state in their own land and not be permanently kicked out of Palestine. And so they will stop refugees from leaving via the Rafah border, via the south of Gaza Strip, because it wants the Palestinians to stay in Palestine and not lose it for good. Because there are Palestinian refugees in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria, and they can never go back to Palestine. They will never be let in. It's like you've left done by, you are now permanently in Lebanon, permanently in Syria, permanently in Jordan. You can't go back to your ancestral home.
So I asked you a lot about Palestinian and Hamas perspective, but just let me ask you your personal opinion. Do you think it would be easier to attain peace under an Israel territory governed by its current day setup in government, or under Hamas / Palestinian, whoever you see as being the ones who would take over that territory in the long term wise or near future ish? What state do you think would be more peaceful under which government?
Well, I mean, look, I think you have to look at the motivations of the different actors, because we haven't discussed the various Zionist movements, Zionist strands, and the dominant ones, and what they want. Because ultimately, it's not just what the Palestinians can't. It's not about what they want. You know, they're the powerless ones. Yeah, they don't have a state military. They don't have the American taxpayer backing them up, right? They are powerless, and by comparison, they could never ever destroy the state of Israel, never defeat the state of Israel. They don't have the weapons or the man. Well, I suppose manpower is relative, because depending on your technology, they don't have infrastructure. They don't have anything really that could defeat the state of Israel. Now, if the state of Israel so wanted, if the international community could turn a blind eye, and if it so wanted, it could wipe the Palestinian Arabs out completely, or kick them out completely from all their land. But there's always going to be consequences if they did try to do it so blatantly. Now, I think your viewers need to understand the motivations here, right? There's the motivation where of the Zionists themselves. What did the Zionists even want? What did they even want in the first place? Yeah. I told you before, when we were discussing before this program, that I believe in the rational actors kind of model. Right? I believe that people act rationally according to what desires they want to achieve. Now, the desires might not be rational exactly, but they have these desires, they have these goals, and or they have some starting assumptions. And based on these starting assumptions, they act rationally, even if the assumptions are not rational, because they're assumptions. So the Zionist movement started in the 19th century in the face of in Western Europe and such, where Jews were being discriminated against, and there was persecutions happening. Maybe in England, there was no pogroms in England exactly, and there's no pogroms against Jews in Canada or America, of course. But there was some, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish animus. There was, there was mistreatment of Jews. There was trials. The Dreyfus affair in France, for example, where a loyal Jewish kind of general, or not general, sorry, kind of a commander was accused of being a traitor to France for the Germans. But he was a scapegoat, right? He was made a scapegoat because he was Jewish. He was just, or let's just, blame the Jews or doubt them. So they faced all these issues, and this was in an era of nationalism, right? Nationalism was growing in Europe. So Theodor Herzl, considered to be the founding father of Zionism, or political Zionism, made an argument called the Jewish State. He wrote a book called The Jewish State, and he argued that the only way that Jews can ever get their rights or be treated fairly is if they control a state, right? They're the ones who control the state. They can't trust other ethnic groups or anyone else. They can't be a minority in another person's state. They have to control their own state. Okay, Theodor Herzl was an atheist. The kind of the founding, you could say, fathers of the Israeli government on the ground, like Benjamin Ben Gurion and others, were socialists, atheists, and socialists. They weren't religious Jews, right? Actually, most religious Jews believe that you couldn't recreate the state of Israel or the kingdom of Israel until the Messiah comes, right? That was the common Jewish belief. Okay, so where am I going with this? Now, yeah, Were Jews persecuted in Europe? Of course. Were they discriminated in Europe? Yes, of course. Throughout, I mean, in America, even was it Henry Ford? He wrote this series of pamphlets called I think the International Jew. It was very anti-Semitic, very nasty against the Semite peoples and their religion. And the West has had a history of mistreating Semite religions and peoples. Anyway, and it's still doing it, but to a different kind of Semites now. Anyway, so was there, you could say, a reasonable motivation for Zionists to think that the only way that Jews could be protected is they control their own state? Well, maybe you could say that. Maybe you think, well, yes, we can't trust Gentiles because look how we were treated in Gentiles in Europe. Yeah, right. But that's not the experience of Jews Jews in the Middle East, right? So this was a movement amongst Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews, basically Western Jews, I suppose, but not in Eastern Jews, right? They had a different experience. Right? They didn't have that bad experience like the ones in Europe did. So it started out from something that people could be sympathetic with almost. It sounds like, okay, yeah, maybe they should have their own state because look how all these pogroms in Russia and look at the discrimination they get and so on. I mean, maybe no pogroms in Anglo-Saxon countries, but like there are some anti-Semitism and so on and so forth. Okay. But here's the sin. Here's where the sin happens, right? You could say, from good intentions, right? The sin, then sin emerges. There was little regard to wherever Jews would settle to make a political state, there was little regard to the already existing inhabitants. And I say wherever they might settle, because did you know that they hadn't actually, or at least Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement hadn't actually all agreed on Palestine. They actually thought there was, at one point, there was two very viable options, which both had pros and cons. Argentina, right? Theodor Herzl wasn't religious, so he didn't care about the Bible and about Palestine in that sense, right? And by the way, they use the word Palestine themselves, to describe the name of the land, right? So, it could have gone either way. Eventually, the Zionist movement later on settled on no, let's make it Palestine, not Argentina, because that has more of a historical gravitas, and we can unite more, Jews under this kind of historical background to it. It's better. But again, Theodor Herzl, atheist, didn't really care about religion or any of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so that's what the sin emerges when they never really paid much attention to the natives. Would the natives agree to having to basically losing political authority in their land to create an ethno state with the express intention that it must be a particular ethnicity that is represented by the government? Yeah, and it's not going to be them, right? That's where the problem occurred. This is where the original sin of Zionism occurred, was they never considered seriously what the natives how they would react and whether they'd be happy with it. It just assumed that they could be bought off, they could be paid to relocate, or they would just accept, and they wouldn't fight back, or they wouldn't have any disagreement with. That is where this whole issue began. The problem began. Now, Theodor Herzl tried to buy Palestine from the Ottomans. He said, maybe I'll buy it from the Ottomans. The Ottomans said, no, we ain't going to sell you the land. You can come in, you can move there. They let Jews come in to migrate. You can move there, but you can't take it over as a ethno state, right? So Jewish migration began into Palestine under Ottoman Islamic rule, right? People don't realize that, right? But then when the British, long story short, the British made an agreement with, under the Balfour Declaration, they made an agreement with some prominent Jews in England to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. They were going to cover the Middle East. So they saw some utility in kind of weakening the Muslim control and in the region by, Lebanon was created to give the Christians a majority there. So they kind of did these shenanigans with the French and the British.
They also allowed territory for Islam, correct, with Jordan. So it's not like they were just granting land to Israelis, Jewish and Christians, correct? They were taking considerations of Islam at the time, no?
Well, Jordan wasn't given as an Islamic state. It was just that they it was just a state for the it was carved up for the Jordanian Hashemites, who were Arabs of mixed backgrounds, right?
Was it
Religious,
under the
Christian
same
and Muslim.
organization and treaty from the British?
Sorry.
So that wasn't part of that resolution from Britain when they're giving territory to the Jews, giving territory to Christians, and giving territory to Islam or Muslims.
Well, the British carved it up according to quote unquote to create these artificial states that had never been states before and were not separate. Made borders between Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. When culturally speaking, Jordanians, Lebanese, Syrians, and Palestinians are considered to be all kind of Levantine. They're all Levantines, and they have a really very similar culture, a similar dialect of Arabic. To create borders between them is artificial. It's just artificial. Like, why would you do that? They all kind of conceive themselves as Levantines, or in Arabic, Shami, right, from Al Sham. It's the whole area. But the British wanted to make small, weaker states which could be easily controlled by an outside power, i.e., them, basically, rather than a big, massive state that would resist foreign control.
That this, because it kind of seemed like that action by the British was coming off particularly to harm or give a great amount of power to the Israelis. And I just want to make sure people kind of really knew that it wasn't just territory unique to Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon, that it was the almost entire Middle East and even parts of Africa.
So I'm not sure where so I don't follow. Sorry, I mean they cut up the Middle East into different parts. Yes,
right. It just when you were originally explaining it, it kind of just made it seem like it was being unique to that they were giving land to the Israels, but weren't taking into consideration for any of the other Islamic states and trying to give unique power to the Jews.
Okay, well, listen to the Jews. They gave in Palestine a specific mandate to make it a Jewish homeland for Jewish migration of those who are not already residing there. Right, that was new. That was unique. That was exceptional. That they didn't do that elsewhere. Everywhere else, they cut the borders up between people who were already living there, Jews, Muslims, and Christians that were already living in these different regions. But Palestine was very unique because they were going to allow mass migration from a foreign population into Palestine who hadn't lived there for.
I see the
yeah, right. So that is unique, yes. And what I mentioned about Lebanon was, Lebanon has a Christian community around Mount Lebanon, but it was cut up specifically to make like gerrymandering, where you create certain majorities of certain political parties that might get increase the amount of chances that you get your political party to power. So they made a country whereby the Christians were 30%, whereas before they would just be a minority around Mount Lebanon, right? But now we're going to create a special state just to make Christians a 30% majority, to disrupt any movement for reunification or any Islamic transnationalism, I suppose, from returning back to the region. That's why Lebanon was created specifically for that reason. But that didn't involve importing or taking people from Lebanon. But that's just a point I'm telling you about why they cut it up into that. The other reasons they made Iraq, the reason why Iraq looks like the way it was, the north part was actually going to go to Syria, but then British discovered oil there, and they said, "Oh, wait a second, we don't want the French-controlled Syria to have that oil, so no France. Iraq's going to look like this," right? And they added the oil bit in the north, right? So sometimes oil was the reason for the borders that the British determined, right? Anyway, that's a side discussion. Where was I? So, okay. So as Jewish migration comes from Europe and Russia, there was from persecuted Jews in Russia. Obviously the local native Palestinians who were seeing everywhere around them, all these different regions will be given their own national self-determination, quote unquote, as natives who were under the yoke of the Ottomans and they couldn't express their national will. So everyone was promised, saying, "Don't worry, we British will give you national self-determination of your own land." Oh, not to you Palestinians, though. We've got some people coming in and they're going to take over that land as the ethnic group that is the preeminent one that will dominate that. But don't worry, you'll have the same civil rights. You'll just be a minority under a state that will represent the majority, which aren't you. It's not going to be you, basically. So, what do you think happened? What do you think the Palestinians would, react to that? Right? Are they going to throw flowers and welcome, people coming in that they were not given a choice over, they weren't consulted with, they weren't asked to give consent, regarding. And prior to the British control of Palestine, there wasn't really so much animus against Jews just migrating to Palestine, because it's a crossroads area. There's been people migrating and going there all the time to live amongst the people. It's not an issue. But when the Palestinians caught wind of the Zionist project, and in fact some of them caught wind of it before the British invaded, then you began to see an animus against these migrants coming into Palestine. And yeah, there was mob fights, and there was all kinds of things happening. Some of them are inexcusable on both sides, both the migrants as well as the indigenous Palestinians. But that's what happened, and it just continued that way. And of course, Ben Gurion. And I'm going to this is a very important exposition, so you understand this. Ben Gurion was a socialist, right? And he believed in democracy, right? He wasn't against democracy, and he didn't want to physically, if you asked him, would you like to kill Arabs and kick them out by force, he wasn't going to say no. He wasn't going to say yes. Sorry, he wasn't going to say yes, I want to do that. What he was hoping was that there'd be so much Jewish migration into Palestine that the Jews would get a majority without necessarily needing to be violent, right? And that they would achieve their goal of a Jewish ethno state. But maybe he did talk about encouragements, like encouraging Palestinians to get employment elsewhere, move out the country, encouraging them, and so on and so forth. But ideally, no one starts off wanting to kill the other people, right? They thought, let's use the soft approach. Let's in an idealistic world, let's do it this way. But of course, the Palestinians just weren't going to accept being overtaken by those people who are migrants. They saw the difference between Palestinian Jews who are indigenous with them and these Europeans who came with European ways and European ideologies, Western ideologies. They didn't look like their Palestinian Jews who were their neighbors, right? And so that led to the conflict. That led to their resistance and their inability to resist. More importantly, and of course with international support, with donations from wealthy backers of the Zionist movement internationally, the Jewish National Fund and many other Jewish banks gave the migrants an edge, and the indigenous population just couldn't compete. They couldn't coordinate. They weren't organized because they've never been needed to be organized in one central polity before. They were overwhelmed. They had no means of resisting. And of course, then came the question, which is, well, the British are now want to stop Jewish migration because of the Arab uprising that occurred at one point and was suppressed by the British and Zionists joining forces together. So what do you do? When migration now is slowing to a trickle, and you can't get that Jewish majority you want by just hoping for migration to take its course. So what you saw was the instigation of 1947 wars, and the Jewish military had a plan called Plan Dalit, which explicitly, this is explicitly mentioned that they're going to create security zones and they're going to push Arabs away from strategic areas because just in case they might be able to help an invasion force come in. And of course, this led to the depopulation of 700,000 Palestinians all across modern day Palestine, being pushed to West Bank, being pushed to Syria, being pushed to Lebanon, being pushed to Egypt, where they managed to cross the borders and leave. But due to bombing of their cities, psychological warfare was used. threats of massacres and actual massacres occurred. Did you know Benjamin Gurion was kind of clever in how they did it. They didn't want to give an official sanction, although they did to some cities being cleared out. But you can tell that he could stop it if he wanted to, because when the Haganah reached Bethlehem, it was majority Christian, and then he stepped in and said, "Guys, don't kick out, don't kind of cleanse Bethlehem, because it's Christian, it's a majority Christian city, and we don't want the Christian superpowers from around the world taking an interest and being outraged, right? So not Bethlehem, okay? Just we don't want that heat, all right? So this is what happened, right? And of course, then in the 1967 war, the Palestinians who were living in West Bank lost West Bank too, and were made now citizenshipless. They didn't have any formal they lost their Jordanian citizenship, and of course the Gaza Strip, which was under Egyptian control, they lost their Egyptian citizenship, and it kind of brings us up to now. We live in a situation where Jewish interests amongst the Zionists have interest for Jewish expansion of West Bank settlements, which are a majority of vast Jewish inhabitants, not the local West Bank Palestinians. The local West Bank Palestinian can't live in these West Bank settlements, right? Which are neighboring them. Okay, and there's walls built all the way around them, and they're populated only by a particular ethnic group. And this is where the argument for apartheid comes up. That now the Palestinians live under apartheid. There's barbed wire and walls around them, around their population centers in the West Bank, and they can't cross over the road to a place that their grandfather could cross to, because there's a settlement there with a virtually exclusively only one ethnic group populating that, which Israel tacitly allows, and it's against international law. This is the Palestinian perspective. This is their experience. And I'm not even going to get started on how depopulation of East Jerusalem, on how Israeli police treat Palestinians differently to treating kind of Israeli Jews. In America, you think that if African Americans get a raw deal from the police and get treated differently. You should see how the Palestinians are treated. They can be shot for mere suspicion of being dangerous, and but an Israeli Jew gets shot by a police officer, there's a much higher scrutiny over why that person was shot, right? This is all evidenced, and this is the situation that leads to these clashes, that leads to the rancor and the hatred, and the fighting, and of course the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they call the Temple Mount. Al-Aqsa Mosque is not technically the Temple Mount, but it's the environs of that place, which was promised to be just a Muslim area for prayer. There's many attempts to kind of say, no, we're going to appropriate that for actually Jewish religious kind of structure or building or what have you, by kind of now these religiously motivated Jewish nationalists, and of course, when you see violence in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right, you have to ask yourself a simple question. Okay, it's a mosque, and there are Muslims in the mosque. Why are they being cleared out by police? Yeah, why is the police going into a mosque to clear out Muslims out of a mosque? Because isn't that where Muslims are meant to be? Or can't you go into a mosque if you're a Muslim? Well, the reason being is because to allow visits by Israeli Jews, to allow them to visit, the police, for security reasons, must make sure that there's no security concerns. And so when they want to organize a visit or by a tour by Israeli Jews, they will clear every Muslim male of between certain ages out of the mosque. And of course, this is a mosque. Why clearing us out of our own mosque? And that's where the police kind of shoot CS gas and rubber bullets and all this kind of stuff to clear out Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, this makes the Palestinian Muslims angry. And of course, then you see them react, both the Palestinian Authority as well as Hamas, who've often reacted to the outrages occurring against Palestinians in the West Bank. So there's a lot of stuff happening here, a lot of things to unpack. But these are all factually the case, as in, like, the clearing out of Al-Aqsa Mosque is a situation. The Israeli police go into a mosque and they clear out the environment. No one denies that. It's not disputed this, but no one questions. Wait a second. Wait.
There's a lot of
What?
actions taking place, but
Yeah.
and honestly, I'm really glad I had you on. Like, you are clearly intelligent. I don't think anyone can really argue that. And I believe you actually have good intentions, and that you just want to educate people, and that you believe in peace. And we talk about, there's a lot of hyped up anger on both sides. And I think you are very good at laying out very good perspectives and facts. But one thing I might, if I see it all, is that you were kind of jump to say that you don't know intent of Hamas or whatnot when you don't like their actions. But then when you see actions done by maybe an Israeli IDF soldier who says they kill a Palestinian individual simply because they are Palestinian, isn't that kind of jumping to an intent in that circumstance? But you're only doing it on one side.
Well, actually, where have I actually ever said that? I never did. What I will really point you to is the fact that there's a different burden of evidence on an Israeli police officer who would shoot.
100%, I absolutely agree with that. But wait,
Yeah.
let's go back to, did you not just say a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about issues with African Americans in police in the United States, and then you referenced an Israeli police officer who could shoot a Palestinian for simply being a Palestinian? I might be
No,
paraphrasing
no,
you.
no. I said for the slightest concern to their safety, they will shoot first, ask questions later, more than they would for an Israeli Jew. That's what I'm saying, and the same goes for police officers in United States of America too. Is that they're more likely to shoot first and ask questions later, concerning African American, because of this fractiousness, ethnic fractiousness, where which is a more fundamental human psychological issue, whereby you view the other ethnicity as different to yourself, or unknowable, or not as predictable as your own people, quote unquote. So you're more likely then to react or misinterpret these other peoples than you would your own peoples. That was my point.
Okay.
That's a psychological principle of humans, unfortunately, is that they react in that way to they have the differential treatment to those they consider to be their people and those considered to be other people.
Do you think it's always prejudice or mainly prejudice, or do you think it's ever also based on maybe that person's personal life experience? And even though they may not be indifferent towards another individual, but because of some things that personally happen to them, they take actions differently. For example, if earlier in that week, if a soldier was killed by somebody who was going to police officers claiming they needed help and stabbed the officer, then maybe later in the week, another police officer, even though they might not be prejudiced, they are concerned for their own safety, and based on current events and history in their lifetime, that they acted accordingly.
Well, I mean, I have no doubt that these scare stories are propagated, and they think, well, this could be more of a danger for me and myself. And but the same thing occurs obviously amongst police in the United States of America. They're told about police officers being shot by African Americans, and they start to think, well, I don't trust African Americans as much as I would Anglo-Saxon Americans, right, or European Americans, and that's a problem, right? We know in America that African Americans get disproportionate prison sentences for the same crimes. So just imagine what Palestinians can experience in the West Bank. And I want to make it very clear: West Bank Palestinians are not Israeli citizens. They're under military rule. They don't, in Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank, they don't determine the laws over them. So there was one military ordinance that banned the Palestinian flag. They're not allowed to wave the Palestinian flag. And the Israeli army can arrest them. They're called administrative detentions, and they get a military court. They don't get a civilian court that judges them. And of course, they can be. They sometimes they don't even have the right to habeas corpus, or they're not. They can be held indefinitely in detention. Some would call this hostage taking, right? But what I've often said, when Hamas does it, it's called hostage taking. When the IDF do it, it's called administrative detentions. But these are not their citizens. These West Bank Palestinians didn't vote for the Israeli government. They didn't. They're not even given elections. If I'm correct, the American government was created on the basis of no taxation without representation, right? No laws about representation. At least be represented. The West Bank Palestinians in Area C have no representation. They're under the military rule of the Israeli army by diktat, whatever the Israeli army wants to order. If you're a Bedouin or you're living in a place that you might have lived there for centuries, but the Israeli army declares that to be a military zone, they can demolish all of your town, village, what have you, and move you out, right? So, which has happened, which happens quite a lot. You see it in the news. You see, well, not as much as should be. If you look for it, you see, especially with Arab Bedouins who who have a nomadic lifestyle as well. But if you want to, in East Jerusalem as well, which has been officially annexed by Israel, if you want to be, the Palestinian population will get bigger over time as people have kids, right? What the Israeli government does is that, when you have children, your children need to live somewhere, and there's all the places are taken up. So you need to build new places. You need to build a new house for them. You need building space. But who's in charge of the building permits? It's the Israeli government. And statistically, again, please check it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Statistically speaking, the Israeli government rarely give out building permits to Palestinians. Most Palestinians in these areas live on unapproved land, unapproved buildings, and face the demolition because of that. And they say, well, they don't have official building permits. Wait a second. Aren't you the occupying power and you're the one that determines whether they have building permits? That's not fair, because as far as they're concerned, they're living on their own land, and they don't have a government that represents them, and now they have to live somewhere, and you just demolish their buildings because they have to live somewhere. They can't all be crowded into like sardines into one house when they have over generations of having kids. Whereas building permits the vast majority are granted to Israeli Jews, right? Statistically, check it out. If you said the UN talks about this, the UN shows statistics. There's also an organization called Beit Salam. It's a Jewish kind of human rights organization, so predominantly Jewish Israelis run it, and they post statistics of this. There is a plethora of issues that the Palestinians face, and all this stems, if you were to kind of reduce all this down to, all this stems to the concern of demographics, that you can't have a Jewish ethno-nationalist state if Jews are even 50-50. Ben Gurion said even 60% is not enough. Is not enough. So Ben Gurion said this. He had concerns that how can you have a viable Jewish state if Jews are only 60% of the population? So this is basically why research is important to check the facts. So what I say is not disputed, by anyone, because these are statistics that are known and are out there. But what you'll generally get, and what I'm looking forward to seeing to the debate with a kind of a Zionist interlocutor, is how it is spun. Right. So they'll say there's no apartheid because 20% of the citizens of Israel are Palestinian Arabs. Yeah, that's what he'll say. So that means that there's no apartheid. And I say, well, did you know that even in South Africa under apartheid, there was a small portion of Black South Africans living in white areas?
And let's leave that for the debate, because I think that's going to be one of the high.
Yeah. I'm just kind of stating the case, but that's anyway. So
I just want to kind of wrap things up, unless you're finishing up something with that last point.
Yes, like the treatment is different, but I want to give you one more thing to indicate that even the law is there are actual racist laws in the state of Israel. I'm not talking about the recent kind of nation state law, which they made explicit that this is a nation state for Jews, and so on and so forth, which was more explicit recently. I don't even need to talk about the recent law. I could talk about the right of return law, right?
Return law?
Yes. This is quite a famous law. If you're a Jew living in anywhere part of the world, as long as your mother is Jewish or provably Jewish, I believe, you can claim the right of return to Palestine or the state of Israel, quote unquote. And this was argued that this is an ancestral right that we give to all Jews to go back to the state of Israel. But they don't tell you the exceptions, right? Did you know that if you are if both, even if your mother and your father are Jewish, and all their grandfather, all your grandfathers, all your grandmothers were Jewish, going back generations, but you convert to Christianity, or you are Christian, or you convert to Islam, you lose the right to return. Mm. You can be ethnically Jewish, 100%, all your ancestry, just all in patrilineal, matrilineal, Jewish. You could come from a rabbi, from family of rabbis and so on, or for the Kohanim and all this stuff. You can, and it matters not a single jot, because you lose that right the moment you convert to Christianity or Islam. You then no longer have the right to quote unquote go back to the state of Israel. But if you're an atheist Jew or a Jewish Jew, then of course that is who the right applies to under Israeli law. So I don't want you to take my word for it. Just check out the law of return, 1950 law of return. Read it for yourself.
I will do that. I appreciate that. Lastly, I just wanted to mention, I wanted to say this in the beginning, something I appreciate about you, because a lot of people, when they discuss difficult conversations, they generally have an agreement beforehand of topics that are off limits and whatnot. I want to make sure everybody knows that you did not ask for anything to be off limits. And then in fact, you encouraged me to ask hard questions. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, otherwise it'd be boring otherwise.
And then I asked you a decent round of questions, but would you like to finish anything up, or do you think there's anything else that the general public should be aware of when it comes to this current crisis going
on? I'm just going to reiterate something I said at the very beginning. The narrative of the Zionist side. I mean, how do you explain that? You're bringing migrants into an area, and the native population don't like that. I mean, I know America's had a bit of a history of doing that, right? America was created that way, of let's say migrants where the natives didn't have a choice in their coming. But I want to say this: do not let people make. I would say you believe that this is about anti-Semitism. This is not about anti-Semitism. Jews and Muslims have lived side by side for centuries. We're the closest to each other religiously, right? Our practices are we have sometimes identical practices. As a Muslim, I can eat meat which has been sacrificed in a certain manner according to Muslim law. I can also eat meat that Jews have sacrificed according to Jewish law. I can't eat. It's called halal, and there's halal meat and kosher meat. I can have kosher meat. I can't have non-kosher meat, non-halal meat. Sacrificed by Christians, at least modern day ones. There's a dispute amongst Muslims as to that issue. But point being is that Jewish kosher meat is because to be ritually clean for us. Yeah, we have no issue with Jews. And Christians as well. I mean, obviously 10% of Palestinians are Christian, by the way, let's not forget. And they too have faced religious issues and problems as well. This is not about hating Jews or wanting to exterminate Jews or even wanting to relocate Jews out of the Middle East. I want to, I know many Jews left Muslim countries to go to Israel. I'm totally happy for them. I would support any Jew that wanted to return back to the Muslim country of origin as well, and get their house back, get their land back, because there was animus. There was when the state of Israel was created, there was this nationalist animus because many Arabs were angry at what was happening to the Palestinians who were being massacred, and many Jews faced who had lived for centuries amongst Muslims faced discrimination, and that's wrong. right? Actually, some Muslim countries even wanted to stop Jews from going to Israel. Said, look, stay here. Well, like Morocco did, like you don't have to leave. Please, stay with us. You know, and there are still Jews living in Morocco today, quite a significant community. So don't let anyone make you think that this is about they just hate us. They just hate us Jews. That's why they are attacking us, or they resist us. And so no, anyone would do the exact same things. You know, no one says, you know, those Native Americans, they just hate white people. They just hate Christians or Protestant Christians or no, they don't. It doesn't care who's coming to their land, right? It's the fact that they're taking over, you know, territory, that they're making settlements and pushing them forward and killing them and hunting them, and raids on their villages or their, you know, their encampments. They didn't like that, and they reacted, right? This is what it's about, and I want to give you a little analogy to understand this. If you don't want people to know the real reason someone's angry with you, you often just say the other person's just crazy. They're just crazy. You know, I don't know if any of you at school did this. I've seen this at school, right? When, you know, one cheeky kid, he slaps someone around the face, or he hits them, or he takes their lunch, you know, whatever, and runs, runs next to the teacher. And then the kid who has been offended by this person chases the kid that hit them. And then even in front of the teacher, hits them back in front of the teacher. What does the teacher say to the first kid? What did you do to make that person do that, right? And what do kids typically say? I don't know. That person just hates me. Just angry, you know, just hates me or doesn't like me. Yeah, that's in essence the Zionist narrative. The most popular narrative is that it's all anti-Semitism. They just hate Jews and so on and so forth. That's the reason why, and it completely obfuscates what's been happening on the ground and how anyone would react to mass migration that was intent to create an ethno-state that where one ethnicity would have a degree of privilege even by weight of numbers in a democracy, right? How would anyone react to that? It doesn't matter what the ethnicity is. Yeah, insert ethnicity in here. It could be anyone. You could exchange to any ethnicity. There would be a reaction to it. And also, as a side small point, the Zionist narrative that obviously Jews are oppressed by Gentiles everywhere unless they have their own state is actually not true anyway. Many Jews who left from Russia because they were being oppressed in Russia and went to Palestine actually used it as a jumping off point to go to America. And America has the second largest Jewish population in the world, I think about 6 million, whereas in Palestine, it's about 7 million. So only about a million difference, I think. So Jews have actually been quite comfortable and successful. And when was the last pogrom in America? I can't remember any, right? So even that, and Canada and the UK as well. So even that narrative is actually false. You know, there was nowhere else for us to go. Of course, there was many places to go, but you're still welcome in the Muslim world. Just don't bring an ethno-nationalist state with you. You know, and that's the Palestinian argument.
I'm going to leave all that for the next guest to answer and for you guys to discuss on further. But again, I really appreciate your time today, brother.
Thank you so much, John. Been a pleasure, and yeah, I look forward to the debate and discussion where all these points I've said I can face challenge, and in return, I can bring more evidences and things like that.
All right, brother. Cheers.
Thank you. Take care. Yep.